You know that feeling you get when you're packing for a trip, the anticipation, the thrill of escape, the promise of something new? Maybe you're scrolling through photos of turquoise water or picturing yourself in a cabin surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. Maybe you're already planning the perfect Instagram post, the one that'll make everyone wish they were you. But before you book your next getaway, you need to hear this. Because some vacations end in memories. Others never end at all. I used to think vacations were safe. A break from the grind, a chance to breathe. But I've learned sometimes the places we go to relax are the very places that change us forever. Sometimes you come back with more than a sunburn or a souvenir. Sometimes you come back with something you can't explain, or you don't come back at all. Tonight, I'm going to share 3 true stories. 3 vacations that started like any other, full of laughter, hope, and the promise of escape. But each one twisted into something darker, something that still haunts the people who lived through them. Or, in some cases, the people who didn't. You'll hear about a group of friends who thought a remote cabin would be the perfect escape until they realized they weren't alone. You'll meet a solo traveler who checked into a luxury resort and discovered there was no way out. And you'll follow a road trip that took a wrong turn into a town that shouldn't exist. Each story is a warning. Each one is a thread in a pattern I'm only just beginning to understand. And if you think you're safe, you might want to check your hotel room twice. Because the scariest part? These stories could happen to anyone, even you. Let's start with a story that still keeps me up at night. There's a certain kind of magic in the air when you heading out of the city. Windows down, music up, the world shrinking behind you in the rearview mirror. That's how it felt that Friday afternoon. Me, Jamie, Lex, and Chris crammed into Jamie's battered old Subaru, laughing at inside jokes and arguing over the playlist. We'd been planning this trip for months, a weekend in a cabin deep in the pines, far from deadlines, traffic, and the constant hum of notifications. No cell service, no neighbors, just us and the wild. The drive itself felt like a ritual, each mile peeling away the stress of our lives. We stopped for greasy burgers at a roadside diner, took photos by a rusted sign that promised world's best pie, and watched the landscape shift from strip malls to rolling hills to dense, endless forest. By the time we turned onto the gravel road that led to the cabin, the sun was low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. The air smelled like pine needles and earth, sharp and clean. The cabin was even better than the photos: weathered wood, a wraparound porch, a stone fire pit out back. Inside, it was all cozy blankets, mismatched mugs, and the kind of silence you forget exists when you live in the city. We unpacked, claimed our rooms, and set about making the place our own. Lex strung up fairy lights on the porch, Chris started a fire, and Jamie uncorked a bottle of cheap wine, declaring it the official start of vacation. That first night, we sat around the fire, telling stories and roasting marshmallows. The darkness pressing in just beyond the circle of light. It felt safe, almost sacred, like nothing bad could touch us out here. We joked about bears and serial killers, the way you do when you're trying to spook each other, but none of us really believed anything could go wrong. Out there, under a sky thick with stars, we felt untouchable. We thought we were alone. We were wrong. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the trees, dappling the cabin in gold. I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Lex humming in the kitchen. For a while, everything felt perfect. We ate breakfast on the porch, trading stories about terrible bosses and failed Tinder dates, the kind of conversations that only happen when you know no one else is listening. The forest was alive with birdsong, the air crisp and cool. It was easy to believe we were the only people for miles. After breakfast, we decided to explore. The woods were thick, the ground soft with moss and fallen needles. We wandered off the trail, laughing as Chris tried to climb a tree and nearly fell, Lex snapping photos of mushrooms and tangled roots. It was Jamie who found the first symbol, a crude shape carved into the bark of a pine, almost like a spiral, but with jagged edges that made my skin crawl. "Probably just some bored hiker," Chris said, but his voice was too loud, too forced. Lex traced the lines with her finger, frowning. "It's weird, though. There's no trail markers out here." Jamie shrugged it off, but I caught her glancing over her shoulder as we walked on. The deeper we went, the more symbols we found. Some were high up, others low to the ground, all carved with the same rough hand. At first, we joked about Blair Witch and secret cults, but the laughter faded as the woods grew darker, the trees pressing in close. The air felt heavier, the silence broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or the distant call of a crow. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Lex asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chris tried to laugh it off, but his eyes darted from shadow to shadow. "It's just the woods. Everything looks creepy out here." But I could feel it too, a prickling at the back of my neck. The sense that something was just out of sight, waiting. We turned back, moving faster than before. The path seemed different, the trees unfamiliar. For a moment, I thought we were lost, but then the cabin appeared through the trees, a welcome sight. We stumbled inside, slamming the door behind us, and tried to shake off the unease. That night, the mood was different. The fire felt smaller, the darkness outside thicker. We played cards, but the jokes were forced, laughter brittle. Every so often, someone would glance at the window, as if expecting to see something staring back. "Maybe we should leave tomorrow," Lex said quietly, but Jamie shook her head. "We're just freaking ourselves out." "It's nothing," Chris agreed, but he kept checking his phone, even though there was no signal. We should have left when we saw the first sign, but we didn't. We told ourselves it was all in our heads, that the woods were just playing tricks on us. But deep down, I think we all knew something was wrong. Something was out there, watching, and it was getting closer. That night, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and making the old cabin creak. We tried to pretend everything was normal. Lex made popcorn. Jamie queued up a horror movie on her laptop. Chris poured us all another round. But the shadows seemed to press closer, the firelight flickering like it was struggling to hold back the dark. Every so often, one of us would glance at the window, half expecting to see a face staring in. It was just after midnight when we heard the first sound, a soft, deliberate knock on the porch. Not the wind, not an animal, 3 slow, measured taps. We froze, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Chris tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "Probably a raccoon," he said, but no one moved. Then came another knock, louder this time. Jamie muted the movie, and the silence that followed was suffocating. We listened, barely breathing. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, circling the cabin. The boards on the porch groaned under the weight of something that didn't care if we heard it. Lex whispered, "Should we look?" But none of us wanted to move. The footsteps stopped by the front door. We heard the handle rattle, a low, guttural scraping, like claws dragging across wood. I grabbed the fireplace poker, hands shaking. Chris edged toward the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. He went pale. "There's someone out there," he whispered. Or something. We scrambled to barricade the doors, shoving the couch and a heavy chair against the entrance. Jamie locked the back door, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the key. Lex grabbed a kitchen knife, her knuckles white. We huddled together in the living room, the fire burning low, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. Outside, the footsteps circled again. Then, impossibly, we heard our names soft, drawn out, almost sing-song. "Lex, Jamie, Chris, come out." The voice was wrong, too deep, too wet, like it was bubbling up from somewhere underground. It sounded like all of us and none of us at once. Chris started to cry, silent tears streaming down his face. Jamie squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Lex stared at the door, her lips moving in a silent prayer. The voice kept calling, sometimes right outside the window, sometimes from the woods. "Come out, let me in." The fire sputtered, threatening to go out. The darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. I could feel it, whatever was out there waiting, hungry. The air grew cold, our breath fogging in front of us. The knocking started again, faster, more frantic, as if it was losing patience. We heard scratching at the windows, the sound of nails or claws dragging across the glass. Something heavy slammed against the back door, making the whole cabin shudder. We pressed ourselves against the barricade, praying it would hold. Then, silence. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then the voice came again, right by my ear, as if it was inside the room. "Let me in," we screamed, stumbling back, knocking over the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the screen casting a weak, blue glow. In that brief light, I saw something at the window, tall, thin, with eyes that glowed like embers. We heard it whisper our names, over and over, until the sun finally began to rise. Only then did the voice fade, the footsteps retreating into the woods. We sat in silence, too afraid to move, waiting for the light to chase away whatever nightmare had come to visit. But the worst part? I knew it wasn't gone. Not really. It was just waiting for the dark to return. As soon as the first gray light crept through the trees, we didn't even speak, we just moved. We grabbed our bags, barely bothering to pack, and bolted for the car. The woods were silent, but it was the kind of silence that feels like holding your breath. Every step felt watched. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Chris fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice before finally getting the door open. We piled in, slammed the doors, and Jamie floored it down the gravel road, the cabin shrinking in the rearview mirror. No one spoke for miles. The only sound was the tires crunching over dirt and the frantic thud of my own heart. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see something running after us, something tall and thin with ember eyes. But the road stayed empty, the forest swallowing everything behind us. We didn't stop until we hit the first gas station, hours away. In the harsh fluorescent light, we looked at each other, pale, hollow-eyed, changed. Lex tried to laugh, but it came out wrong, brittle and sharp. Chris wouldn't let go of the fireplace poker he'd brought with him, gripping it like a lifeline. Jamie just stared at her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken the first day. That's when she froze. "Guys, look at this." She handed me her phone. In one of the photos, the four of us stood in front of the cabin, arms around each other, smiling. But in the shadows behind us, barely visible, was a fifth figure, tall, thin, with eyes that glowed red even in daylight. We never went back. We never found out what it wanted. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, my name, whispered from the dark, promising it's only waiting for me to come back. If you think that's unsettling, wait until you hear what happened to a solo traveler in paradise. I'd always dreamed of a solo vacation, just me, a suitcase, and a week of sun-soaked freedom. When I found the ad for the Miramar resort, it felt like fate. The photos were unreal. White sand beaches, infinity pools that melted into the horizon, palm trees swaying under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The price was suspiciously low, but I told myself I deserved a little luck. I booked it on impulse, barely reading the fine print. The moment I arrived, everything felt heightened. The air was thick with the scent of tropical flowers. The lobby gleamed with marble and gold. And a team of staff in crisp uniforms greeted me with identical, dazzling smiles. "Welcome to paradise," they said in perfect unison, their voices just a little too smooth. I laughed it off, chalking it up to overzealous hospitality. At check-in, the woman behind the desk took my passport and slid it into a drawer. "For your safety," she said, her smile never faltering. "You won't need it here." I should have known something was off when they took my passport, but I was too distracted by the glass of champagne they pressed into my hand, the cool towel scented with something sweet and unfamiliar. My room was a dream, plush white sheets, a balcony overlooking the ocean, a welcome basket overflowing with fruit and chocolates. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The minibar was restocked every time I left, the towels folded into elaborate animal shapes, the staff always appearing just as I needed something, as if they were watching. The other guests seemed just as enchanted, drifting from pool to bar to spa in a kind of blissful daze. Everyone smiled, but no one really talked. At dinner, I tried to strike up a conversation with a couple at the next table, but they just nodded, their eyes glassy and distant. That first night, I lay in bed listening to the waves, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The resort was everything I'd ever wanted, so why did it feel like a dream I couldn't wake up from? I told myself I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew paradise shouldn't feel this much like a trap. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was printed on thick, creamy paper, the resort's logo embossed at the top. For your comfort and safety, it read, "Please observe the following guidelines. Do not leave your room after midnight. Do not discuss the outside world with staff. Enjoy your stay." I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of quirky marketing gimmick, but the words stuck with me, echoing in my mind as I wandered the manicured grounds. At breakfast, I tried again to make small talk with the other guests. A woman in a sun hat sat alone, stirring her coffee in slow, hypnotic circles. "Beautiful place, isn't it?" I said, forcing a smile. She looked up, her eyes unfocused. "It's perfect," she replied, but her voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "We're so lucky to be here." I waited for her to say more, but she just went back to her coffee, her hand trembling ever so slightly. Later, by the pool, I met a man named Daniel. He was the first person who seemed even remotely normal, nervous, fidgety, glancing over his shoulder as he spoke. "How long have you been here?" I asked. He hesitated. I'm not sure." The days blur together. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Have you tried to leave yet?" I shook my head, suddenly uneasy. "Don't," he whispered. "Not unless you're ready. They don't like it when you break the rules." That afternoon, I noticed the staff watching me. Always smiling, always polite, but their eyes followed me everywhere. I asked the concierge about local tours, but she just smiled wider. "Everything you need is right here, sir. Why would you want to leave paradise?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were cold, unblinking. At dinner, I sat next to an older couple. The woman's hands shook as she buttered her bread. "We tried to leave once," she murmured, not looking at me. Her husband squeezed her hand, hard. "Don't," he said, his voice barely audible. "Just enjoy your stay. It's easier that way." I wanted to ask more, but a waiter appeared at our table, his smile sharp as a knife. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, and the couple fell silent, staring at their plates. That night, I lay awake, listening to the distant sound of waves and the faint, rhythmic thump of footsteps in the hallway. I checked the clock, 2:13 a.m. I remembered the note. "Do not leave your room after midnight." I pressed my ear to the door, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped outside my room. I held my breath, waiting. After a long moment, they moved on. The next morning, Daniel was gone. His room was empty. His things vanished as if he'd never existed. I asked the staff, but they just smiled and said, "There is no guest by that name." The other guests avoided my eyes, their faces blank and distant. I started to realize I wasn't the first to try to leave. I just might be the last. The rules weren't just suggestions, they were warnings. And the more I tried to understand, the more I felt the walls closing in, the resort's perfect facade cracking to reveal something hungry beneath. By the third day, the resort's perfection had curdled into something suffocating. The air felt thick, the sunlight too bright, the staff's smiles stretched a little too wide. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by the staff, but by the very walls themselves. Every time I tried to call home, my phone displayed no service. The Wi-Fi, which had worked flawlessly before, now refused to connect. I asked for my passport at the front desk, and the woman behind the counter just smiled, her eyes glassy and unblinking. "It's safe with us," she said, her voice echoing in my head long after I'd walked away. That night, I decided I couldn't stay another minute. I packed my bag, heart hammering, and waited until the resort was quiet. Midnight came and went. I slipped out of my room, careful not to let the door click shut behind me. The hallway was empty, the lights dimmed to a sickly yellow. My footsteps sounded too loud on the plush carpet. I made my way to the lobby, but the path seemed longer than I remembered. The hallways twisted and turned, branching off in directions that didn't make sense. I passed the same painting 3 times, a woman in a red dress. Her eyes following me, her smile growing wider with each pass. I tried to retrace my steps, but the doors all led to the same place, a long, windowless corridor lined with identical doors. My panic grew with every turn. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, measured, inhumanly steady. I ducked into a side hallway, pressing myself against the wall. A staff member glided past, his face stretched into a rictus grin, eyes black and bottomless. His hands were too long, fingers twitching as he passed. I held my breath until he was gone, then forced myself to keep moving. I found a stairwell and bolted down, hoping to reach the ground floor. But the stairs spiraled endlessly, the numbers on the doors blurring together. I tried every exit, but each one opened onto another hallway, another impossible loop. The resort was folding in on itself, reality bending and twisting until I couldn't tell up from down. At one point, I stumbled into the kitchen. The staff there didn't look up, their faces blank, their movements mechanical as they chopped and stirred. One of them turned, and I saw that his mouth was sewn shut, the stitches black and oozing. He raised a finger to his lips, a warning, and I backed away, heart pounding. I tried the main entrance, but the doors wouldn't budge. I pounded on the glass, screaming for help, but the world outside was dark and empty, the ocean gone, the sky a swirling void. I ran to the back, searching for a service exit, but every door led me back to the lobby, where the same woman sat behind the desk, her smile never wavering. Desperate, I ran outside, expecting to find the beach, the pool, anything familiar. Instead, I found myself in a courtyard surrounded by high, windowless walls. The sky above was wrong, too close, too dark, swirling with shapes that didn't belong. The air was thick and cold, pressing in on me from all sides. I realized then that the resort wasn't on any map, and neither was I. I was trapped in a place that fed on hope, on longing, on the desperate need to escape. The staff, the guests, even the walls, they were all part of it, all watching, all waiting. I don't remember how I got back to my room. I woke up in bed, my bag still packed, the sun streaming through the window as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The resort had let me go for now, but I could feel it watching, waiting for me to try again. And I knew, deep down, that not everyone was so lucky. I don't remember leaving the resort. One moment, I was lying in bed, the memory of that endless night pressing down on me like a weight. The next, I was standing in the airport, my suitcase at my feet, my passport clutched in my hand. My flight was boarding, my name echoing over the loudspeaker. I stumbled through security, numb and disoriented, unable to recall how I'd gotten there. The only proof I'd ever been at the Miramar Resort was a single, sand-dusted postcard in my bag, no return address. Just the words, "Wish you were here," scrawled in a hand I didn't recognize. Back home, nothing felt real. My friends said I looked different, older, thinner, like I hadn't slept in weeks. I tried to tell them what happened, but the words stuck in my throat, dissolving into silence. At night, I dreamed of endless hallways and smiling faces, of doors that led nowhere and voices whispering my name from the dark. Sometimes, I'd wake to find sand in my sheets, the faint scent of tropical flowers lingering in the air. I started seeing the resort's logo everywhere on travel ads, in the corner of my computer screen, even carved into the condensation on my bathroom mirror. I'd catch glimpses of staff uniforms in crowds, Their faces always turned away, their smiles just out of sight. I knew then that I hadn't really escaped. Not completely. The resort had marked me, claimed a piece of me that I'd never get back. If you ever get an invitation to a place you've never heard of, burn it. Don't look at the photos. Don't read the reviews. Some vacations you never return from. Not really. But not all horrors are supernatural. Some are all too human. There's a kind of freedom you only feel on the open road, windows down, music blasting, the world stretching out in front of you like a promise. That's how it was for us, me, Sam, Riley, and Jess crammed into Riley's ancient minivan, a cooler full of snacks wedged between us, and no real plan except to drive until we found something worth stopping for. It was supposed to be a weekend of bad diner food, cheap motels, and inside jokes that would last us the rest of the year. We left the city behind in a blur of laughter and caffeine, the skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror. The air felt lighter with every mile, the landscape shifting from concrete to rolling fields and sleepy little towns. We stopped at every weird roadside attraction. We could find a giant fiberglass cow, a haunted gas station, a diner shaped like a UFO. Jess insisted on taking a photo at each one, her phone filling up with blurry snapshots and goofy faces. The hours melted away in a haze of sun and static, the van rattling over back roads that twisted through forests and farmland. We argued over the playlist, sang along to songs we barely remembered, and made up stories about the people in the cars we passed. Sam kept a running tally of the strangest billboards we saw. Jesus saves, world's largest ball of twine. Try our famous pickled eggs. Every stop felt like a tiny adventure. Every wrong turn just another story to tell. By the time the sun started to set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, we were somewhere none of us recognized. The GPS had lost its signal miles back, but we didn't care. We were together, and the world felt wide open, full of possibility. Looking back, I wonder if we ever really had a choice. We took a wrong turn, or maybe the road took us. Either way, that was the last time any of us felt truly free. It was Jess who spotted the sign, first a faded wooden board half swallowed by weeds. The paint peeling but just legible in the dying light. Welcome to Ashford. Population 312. The numbers looked like they'd been repainted more than once. The strokes uneven and desperate. We were low on gas, hungry, and the map app was still spinning its little loading wheel. So we turned off the main road and followed the cracked asphalt into town. Ashford looked like a postcard from another era. The storefronts were old brick and hand-painted glass, the kind of places you'd expect to see in a black and white movie. A barbershop pole spun lazily outside a shop with lace curtains. The gas station had analog pumps and a bell that rang when we pulled in. There were no chain stores, no neon, just a handful of people moving slowly along the sidewalks, their faces pale and unsmiling. Riley rolled down the window to ask for directions, but the man at the pump just stared at us, his eyes a little too wide, his smile a little too fixed. "You folks just passing through?" he asked, his voice flat and hollow. "Yeah, we got turned around," Sam replied, trying to sound casual. "Is there a motel or somewhere we can grab a bite?" The man's smile didn't move. "You'll find what you need. Just don't wander after dark." He turned away before we could ask anything else. Inside the diner, the air was thick with the smell of grease and something sweet and cloying. The waitress wore a uniform straight out of the 1950s, her hair in tight curls, her lipstick too red. She handed us menus without a word, her eyes flicking nervously to the clock on the wall. The radio behind the counter played old swing music, the signal crackling in and out. Jess tried to make a joke. Did we drive into a time machine? But no one laughed.